right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting. Today we have an important agenda today as we tee up and prepare for our annual budget review. So Commissioners, a couple things. I'm going to start us off by recognizing some individuals who are here with us today, and then we'll get right into the budget. We have a few quick items that we'll move through pretty quickly, and then we'll get right into the preliminary fiscal plan. And so at that time, I'll turn it over to our City Manager. One other highlight, I should actually say a couple other highlights. Commissioners, right after Committee of the Whole, we have an executive session, so I'll call for that right at the end, and this is related to litigation, pending litigation. And then we have legislative team. That'll be just a really brief meeting to talk about one item, and then we have public safety at 2 p.m., and that's down in 601. So to get us started today, I'm gonna come up here and join our Parks Director and recognize the Junior League of Grand Rapids for some of the work that they have done to raise money to help support Raspberry Field.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, City Manager, Mayor, and Commissioners. David Marquardt, Director of Parks and Recreation. The Parks Department has been successful in leveraging nearly $12 million of outside funding over the last 5 years to match 2013 voter-approved Parks Millage funding. I am so pleased to be here today to introduce to you 4 individuals from the Junior League of Grand Rapids who have graciously come alongside the Parks Department to support yet another project this coming year at Raspberry Field Park. And so with me today I've got Ms. McBride, Ms. Haringa, Ms. Lemke, and Ms. Jacoby, and I would like to invite Ms. Jacoby up to the podium here to speak on behalf of this opportunity.
Great. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. The Junior League of Grand Rapids has been in Grand Rapids for 94 years. We're one of the oldest continually operating nonprofits here in the city. We're a group of women volunteers who focus on improving children's physical health here in Grand Rapids. We are so honored to be here today to present the city with a check for $50,000 that we have done with our fundraising to help support the children's play yard at Raspberry Field. So on behalf of the Junior League of Grand Rapids, thank you so much for letting us participate in this wonderful parks program. And we are so excited to be here, so thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to come, yes, we should clap. Thank you so much. So Raspberry Field is technically in the first ward, but it really serves families in the first and third ward. So I'm going to ask my colleagues from the first and third ward to join me down here, and maybe we can get a group picture with you ladies. So is Steve Guitar here to take a picture? Great. Thank you. Yes, you definitely need the big
I'd like to do a left down.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you.
Or I can't if you don't, Commissioner. Oh.
I was thinking that same thing. Right. Listen that to us.
Yeah, we're planning, right? It's sort of a mental thing.
Thank you.
Third ward cake.
So I just want to say thank you again to the Junior League and really everyone who steps up again and again to make sure that our parks are beautiful, safe places for kids. So thank you. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to our items, our action items. So we'll start with the first one. This is a resolution approving the request from Celebration Banquets for Class C redevelopment liquor license to be located at 123 Ionia Street.
So moved.
Support. All right, welcome. You want to tell us about this?
Good morning. Celebration Banquets submitted their application on February 13th for a new Class C redevelopment liquor license. This is going to be issued at 123 Ionia Street Southwest. The Downtown Development Authority adopted a resolution in support of this item at their meeting on April 10th. And all internal departments have completed review and are recommending approval.
Great. Thank you. Commissioners, any questions about this? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving the request from the Comedy Project for a redevelopment liquor license to be located at 540 Leonard Street over there on the west side.
So moves.
All right, and this is a fun project, new addition to the west side.
Absolutely. They submitted their application on March 4th of this year for a redevelopment liquor license to be issued at 540 Leonard Street, Suite B. The West Side Corridor Improvement District adopted their resolution in support of the application at their meeting on April 5th, and the internal review has been completed, and we are recommending approval.
Great. Commissioners, any questions or comments?
Well, I'm just super excited to see these guys get open here.
Yeah, me too. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution authorizing certain special events subject to Chapter 53 of the City Code.
Support.
All right, Ms. Pittman, you want to tell us about this?
Good morning. These are the events that will be occurring in the city of Grand Rapids on public property throughout the end of April, May, and June. We have 2 weddings that are requesting fireworks, actually, as well as hot air balloons. So we have Ted Jensen here, fire inspector, to speak to that.
Sounds like a fun wedding.
Yeah.
Ah,
Well, let's hope so. Right now, it's going to be viewed as like our standard procedure for Celebration on the Grand, which we don't do anymore, but 4th of July, those kind of fireworks. So fire department will be in attendance from the time the explosives arrive until I sound the all clear at the end of the event.
all right.
Eyes
And hot
will
air
shut.
balloons and,
That,
yeah,
I'll leave to her.
fun stuff.
So the hot air balloons will be tethered, and they will be operated by a licensed pilot and operator
Okay,
with insurance.
all right, fun. All right, Commissioners, any questions?
Is Ted a wedding crasher then, technically?
Could be.
You could be, actually. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Commissioners. So that takes us quickly to our budget-related items, which will take the rest of our morning. And so I'm going to just turn it over. This is not an action item. This is the presentation of our preliminary fiscal plan that I know our city manager and city staff have been working hard on. And so I will turn it over to him to take it from there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. We're pleased today to bring to you the unveiling of our preliminary fiscal 20 fiscal plan. I want to ask the staff if they could join me up front. We're going to be joined by our CFO, Jeff Dode, who is the dude.
Or known as.
I always pronounce his last name as Dude, but I got it right this morning. Jeff Dode, the dude.
So should we call you the Big Lebowski or something?
And also, I'm going to ask our 2 assistant city managers assistant city manager and deputy city manager to join him at his budget staff, right? Is your staff coming up there with you?
They're in the back, yeah.
All right, good. My pleasure this morning to unveil the budget, and I want to, before I get into the schedule, just talk about our journey. And this is, although we're publicly talking about the actual financial allocations for the first time today, we have not been discussing the policies for the first time. We've been on this journey since November. So much of what will be discussed today is a continuation of our conversations around our strategic planning and strategic priorities. And I have to, first of all, thank you for allowing us to have those discussions in the various work sessions. And you have been co-producers of the current budget that we have now based on your feedback, your guidance, and your input. And so you really have seen the sneak preview of this budget as we've been developing our strategic plan. In addition to your guidance and your leadership, I also want to acknowledge the outstanding work of all of the cast of employees who have been part of this production, to include those 40-plus employees that were part of the strategic plan development, our project manager, Allison Sutter, and also the budget team that we have today. I have seen very many budgets compiled in two other communities, and I tell you, the budget talent that we have in the organization is second to none. So I want to thank our CFO, Jeff Dode, for his leadership. He has done an outstanding job, and I also want to thank his budget team for helping to get us to this point. And I don't want to take them for granted. I want to acknowledge them specifically. Ms. Carter, Ms. Eastman, Mr. Hybor, Ms. Mendez, Mr. Sandin, Ms. Salazar, and Ms. Wallace. I want to thank them all for their contribution to the work. In addition to that, I cannot go on without acknowledging the contributions of my cabinet. We sat in our staff meeting the other day, and collectively there's almost 300 years of public sector experience that I get the privilege of being advised by, and almost 500 years of people being experts in the various industries that we get to bring to the forefront of all of our recommendations to this body, but particularly the budget. And I want to thank them all for their leadership, all of the department directors, the financial analysts, the liaisons, and every single department that have been working. We have been building the budget concurrently with the strategic plan, with also the ongoing process of the labor negotiations, and many of those people that I mentioned earlier are involved in all three and have been doing a fine job in managing all of the processes. And certainly I want to also acknowledge Deputy City Manager Eric DeLong for his support and contribution in helping to transition leadership in the organization, but also insights into the budget perspective. And we're pleased to also be joined by our newly appointed Assistant City Manager, Doug Matthews, who will have the pretty soon homework assignment that will require him and his team to come and present at one of our future work sessions. So let me begin with the schedule here today. As the mayor mentioned, we are not asking you to make any decisions. This is our opportunity to inform because of the condensed time frame from previous years. Normally, the expectation would be just to present, receive the budget, and then come back later on and deliberate. But we are going to allow some discussion today that you might have. We did try to get information to you as soon as possible around the budget recommendations. But we also have reserved time in several meetings. Next Tuesday, we will have another work session from 9 to noon to discuss the economic prosperity, affordability, mobility, and safe community. We have 6 strategic priorities. We're going to discuss 3 on the 30th, the next 3 on the 7th, and the 14th, we will have another discussion in a public hearing that evening. And hopefully, I'll talk a little bit more around about this towards the end. We would want to get all your feedback and questions as much as we can by that Thursday of that week, if not on the 14th, and have one final deliberation on the 21st before you adopt the budget in the evening that night. I understand that there may be some desire to have a continual dialogue. Hopefully, if we've done a good job on listening, that we'll be able to adopt the budget on the 21st, but we have reserved another meeting on the 23rd. I had been informed that there was some commissioners who may have some scheduling difficulties, and before we proceed, I want to see if that is still the case and if we need to make any adjustments in the schedule.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. City Manager. I just was wondering if there was a possibility of swapping April 30 and May 7 dates. I'll be out of town for the April 30 meeting for a work commitment for the entire week, so all of it's important, but I'd really like to be part of the discussion around the economic prosperity, affordability, mobility, and public safety.
I think the staff certainly can accommodate that, and as long as there's a agreement with everyone else, I see no problem making that adjustment.
I'm supportive of that.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe we can just swap the topics from the 7th to 30th.
Absolutely.
Well, just one, hopefully, unnecessary change for me. There's a hold for the 21st in case we need it. Or no, it's the 23rd.
Yes.
And I do have to present at the Historic Preservation Awards from 2 to 3. So
see.
I can always leave and come back.
Well, my hope is it's in case, but
Yeah.
hopefully we will be able to adopt it before then. But if we do, we will certainly make adjustments and make sure you're part of the deliberations that day.
Thank you.
Okay. So what I will do from this point, there will be, if you will permit, I think what will help if we can get through the materials, and if you could hold your questions until the point of time in which we'll have breaks. There'll be 2 breaks. We'll get through some preliminary financial information. I'll start off with some of the overview. I'll turn it over to Mr. Dode, and he will present, and then after his presentation, we can pause for the historical performance and some of the cost drivers in the budget, and ask if you have any questions then, and then we'll proceed with talking about the new investments. And this year's budget may look and feel just a little bit different because in addition to making sure we have financial fitness, I would like to focus the majority of our time not talking about every department where there's continuity of funding for continued operations, but specifically focusing on the areas where there are changes in our strategic priorities and new investments. So just as a reminder, again, I alluded to this earlier, everything we do now is built on our strategy around our values as an organization, our 6 values, our vision to make sure that we have a equitable, welcoming, innovative, and collaborative city with a robust economy and that's safe and healthy, and there's an opportunity for a high-quality life for everyone. And you'll see elements in the budget that reinforces that and making sure that we're able to provide excellent city services through those values for all of our residents. We'll talk about our 6 priorities areas, and we just discuss, we'll do an overview of all 6 today, and we'll come back at later work sessions and deep dive into whatever questions that you might have outstanding on each of the areas. Just a few highlights, if I could. There's a lot that we have achieved year to date. This still remains a very prosperous community, a very well-managed and well-run organization with highly competent and trained employees and good leadership from our elected officials. Our reserves are very strong. We have had one of our highest reserve levels in years. Our Parks Department continues to grow. We've added 49 parks that have either been rehabilitated or constructed with the millage. We have increased the conditions of our streets, where we have now 60% of our streets that are in good to fair condition, and I think years ago it was just the opposite. 60% were in a poor condition. And we have people experiencing Grand Rapids through all of our recreational activities, to include a high level of people going to the pools, as well as our fire department recently achieved their first becoming the first city in the state of Michigan to achieve the top ISO 1 rating from the Insurance Services Office. And with your leadership and guidance, we were able to get some of the recommendations from Housing Now, which had been long deliberated, across the finish line shortly after my arrival. We were able to continue our partnership with the 61st District Court, and there is additional investments in our safety services related to the courts. But one of the things that we were real pleased with was the eviction prevention pilot that has worked well in the court. You'll see as we have had successful experience with our dash and a 30% increase in the circulator route, you'll see as we talk about our new investments enhancing or sustaining that mode of transit, and our conversations about third ward equity. With your guidance, we were able to develop an allocation plan, even though it was budget last year. Unfortunately, we were not able to spend all of it in fiscal year 19, but there is a continued effort to roll over those funds for FY20. And this past year, we had one of our highest outcomes with our Neighborhood Match Fund program with 37 projects, and we'll talk about enhancing that program with more engagement with budget investments. The police department continues to focus on improving their effectiveness and the recommendations from the 21st Century Task Force on Community Policing has been implemented, or is being implemented. We continue to find ways to improve our police and community relations. You'll hear some things in this budget that continues to improve in that endeavor. And our economy remains prosperous. Even though we have created 595 jobs or created or retained those jobs, and a significant private investment in our economy, we cannot rest on our laurels, and you'll see things that will further our economic prosperity as well as the equitable outcomes related to our economy. So at this time, I am going to ask our CFO to give us some insights on some of the fiscal plan highlights and cost drivers.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioner, City Manager, and staff. So I'm going to go through just a general overview of the highlights of the budget real quickly, starting with the layout of the fiscal plan. So you'll see this year we changed the plan format a little bit. We went back to a fund level presentation and also a departmental section, and then future years we're going to build on that departmental section to include the operating, the capital, and then strategic priorities for that department, and then their KPIs. So this is a start to that direction, but I think it's going to be more readable to the users. So you can see, and we also included the strategic plan in this particular budget.
Jeff,
Yes.
Mr. Dode, I don't know how my colleagues feel, but I really like the format.
Good.
So I just wanted to give you that initial feedback that I really like how it's laid out
Some
this year.
complaints on the themes in previous years, so I think this is more readable, yeah.
It is. Thank you.
Sure. As you know, we use contingencies. We have about 32% fund balance with the general fund unassigned and our budget stabilization fund. Our target is 15 and 10, so we're about 7% above our targets, which is great. And as you know, contingencies are used. We're a self-insured organization. We use the extra money for investment earnings, liability settlements, and things like that. So the financial cushion is needed just to perform our operations. And again, our general fund contingent is $1.5 million in each year of the 5-year plan. Some other guidelines that we go through when we build this budget. In the upper left-hand corner, you see we always fund 100% of the actuary computed employer contribution, which is a new term this year. They changed it a little, so both our 2 pension systems and our 3 retiree health care, and I have some information on those coming up. Again, we fully fund our health care costs with an 80-20 employer-employee split. And then we fully fund our capital improvement plan using sound asset management principles. And then we always look at the impact on our operating budgets too when we propose new capital items. We have maintenance of effort due to our past millage and our increase in our income tax, the parks investment and vital streets, and I'll show those in a minute. And then we also set aside 4.5% of our income tax receipts into the capital reserve fund. And then this year, due to the unprecedented, I think it was the lowest returns in December since the Great Recession, so we put a $500,000 cushion in this budget until we get our police and fire pension actuary back, which we should have this month. So hopefully that's a good figure for that amount. We always look at the police department minimum of support. It's 32%, and we're at this year 37.77%. And then the bottom right hand, you'll see our income projected income tax growth. We're expecting to finish at 4.5% year over year as of June 30 of 18, and then we did a 3% annual in the out years. Here's again our 2 commitments. General fund, we committed to $13 million over 15 years. And in the initial years, we funded a little heavier, but now we're doing a straight $850,000 a year to make that commitment. And then you'll see how the parks maintenance of effort has grown. That grows with the increase in the general fund expenditures. So it's gone up over $1 million since inception. Talk a little bit about legacy costs. This is our OPEB funding history. The orange line is a growth in our assets. You can see we're about $63 million as of June 30 of 18. So very good results. The gray line is the total unfunded piece. You can see that going down, which is also a good thing. And then the accrued liabilities is a blue line. We're making very good progress. I think our progress overall, we were about 46% funded. When you combine the 3 plans, this shows individually by each plan how the level we're funded at. And you'll see general funds down at 22.9%, and this is all based upon when people are expected to retire and use this benefit. So these plans really are not expected to be fully funded. It's just the goal is to not run out of money as people retire and use these benefits. Pension system, this is our general fund pension funding. You can see we had unfunded just around $100 million. The yellow line is our assets, just over $420 million or so. And then the accrued liability is the gray line on top. And you'll see a very similar result for the police and fire on slide 16. Overall, we're about 82% funded in that range for both of our pension systems. Total appropriations in this year's plan, $563 million. It's down last year. I think we're around $594 last year, and that's really as a result of lower. Sometimes we'll issue more capital items or issue bonds in a certain year, so that this number can be affected by those types of things. But overall, we are lower, about $30 million. Here's our general fund forecasted fund balance. You're typically seeing this as a GOF 5x5, we call it. You can see we're anticipating about a $700,000 surplus in '20, and then you'll see some operating deficits in the out years. If you look at the bottom line, our policy unassigned fund balance is 15%. We pretty much hit that through the 5 years of the plan. Obviously, if assumptions stay this way, we'll have to make some adjustments in the future, but we've got time to figure that out. But overall, still very good financial performance. And our budget stabilization, this is we don't have any anticipated transfers into this fund throughout the 5 years, so you can see it's a calculation of the total GOF expenditures. So as those goes up, the percentage goes down, but still healthy reserves in our budget stabilization fund. Here's a breakdown of the revenue in the general fund. You can see income taxes at $87.7 million, by far the largest source of revenues in the general fund. Property taxes about $14.5 million, and then state grants is really revenue sharing, and fire grants is our third largest piece. And you can see from there the other breakdown. This is our general fund income tax growth, and again, this is just general fund. You can see in 13 we're about $62 million. Our 19 estimates about 85, and you can see it growing to just under $100 million in our forecast by FY 2024. And then as a reminder, our income tax is broken out 4 ways. General fund is the majority. Again, we put 4.5% to capital reserve. Vital streets is just under $12 million. I think when we started the program, it was down around 9, so that's seen really good additional growth. And then $2.2 million goes over to our sidewalk repair fund. General fund property taxes, again, we saw the total amount about $13.9 million, estimating 14.6 in FY20 and slow growth through property taxes. And as you know, that's always capped by Proposal A, and that will really never recover from the Great Recession. Property taxes, when we get those in, they're distributed 5 different ways, as well as to the school system and other entities. But internally, general fund gets about 14.5. We put 1.25 mils into the capital reserve fund. The libraries fund gets just under 11 million. And then refuse and the parks millage is about $4.2 million. Revenue sharing from the state of Michigan, we're projecting at 18.7 million, which is the constitutional piece and 1/2 of the county, village, township revenue sharing program. And they're actually projecting a very small increase in that piece this year, which they haven't changed since 2012. So you can see that slight change. Half of that goes to the capital reserve at $2.7 million. So that's a positive sign, although a small positive sign. And as a reminder, I think in our peak days we were around $27 million in revenue sharing, so still significantly below where we were in total in 2002. General fund expenses broken out by category. You can see personnel is by far the largest piece of our budgets, about $96 million in the general fund. Other service and charges is a big piece as well, and then other financing includes a lot of our transfers out to like the district court, dispatch, things like that. And capital is a very little small part in the general fund. That's usually handled through our capital reserve and capital improvement funds. Total expenditures $148.9 million. We were around $143 million last year. So. This breaks out the general fund expenses by department. You show the last couple years of adopted budget for 18-19 and then the FY20 request. 3 of the largest departments, again, police at 56.2, fire at 32.5, and then fiscal shows really high at 30.3, but again, we get lumped into a lot of those general fund categories like transfers out and things that kind of throws our budget a little skewed. Trust me, we don't have that big a budget staff. And again, 148.9 million total GOF expenditures. Operating transfers, I just talked about that a bit. We have 5 different transfers. Most of them have remained pretty steady. You can see the district court has increased, and that's primarily a result of lower revenues in the court system. You can see we transferred community dispatch. Cemetery operating is fairly flat, and then our vital streets commitment at $850,000. And then this is a new slide we added to cost for services for residential customers. You can see between our water sewer rates and a proposed tax bill, about a $48 increase over last year, or roughly $4 a month. And the largest piece in the tax bill increase was the increase from 51.5 to 54.2 in the average assessed value. And then the estimated average market value in the city is 145,542. And that is all I had for my portion of the presentation.
So we'll pause now and see if there are any questions from commissioners before we go on to the next section.
All right, thank you. I'll start with a couple questions. So going back to legacy costs for OPEB, 46% fully funded there, but I want to highlight, and I think I'm still correct on this, only because I have a good sense of statewide issues around OPEB. We are still, out of all the cities in the state, we are still doing much better than most, especially when it comes to OPEB. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. I would say we're probably in the top 10-ish, kind of
Okay.
that range of funding, yes.
Okay. I just want to highlight that because we made some very difficult decisions around this table to get us to a place where we were able to address OPEB costs.
Yeah, to go from zero funding in '07 to over $63 million is a huge accomplishment. We did make some adjustments to the actuarial assumptions this year. We had a 7% actually built-in cost for the Cadillac tax, which we don't feel is going to come to fruition anymore.
ACA.
So we removed that from this calculations this year, which lowered our annual required contributions, which allowed us to spend some money on some other investments this year,
Great.
which was good to see.
And then my other question is related to pension. So when I was reading the budget book, and I can't remember what page it's on, it had the percentage of payroll that we're still paying towards pension. And if I remember
Roughly
from my
24%.
And it looked like it was 25% for the next 5 years. And we all know this, I know some of you serve on our pension board, it's a significant amount of our revenue goes towards pension because we're underfunded. Can you give me a sense of long-term when we're going to start to see a reduction?
So the 5 years that I've seen, it really hasn't, the projections they've given us haven't really moved the needle on the funding percentage. So it's a long-term liability. You know, the only way to really increase that funding is to pay over and above the actuarially required amount. So the 5 years doesn't show it moving the needle a whole lot in the projections. That's as far as they go out. Our Gabriel Roder Smith, who does those for us, only does a 5-year projection on those. So.
Okay.
I have a
All
follow-up.
right, Commissioner.
We did contribute about $2 million extra last year. We had some extra withholding from the pay due to that combined DB and DC that we did send over to the pension fund. So hopefully we can continue to do those types of things to lower that liability.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner.
So, Jeff, as a follow-up to that, what is best practice for a corporation in terms of legacy costs and is the percentage of wages for pension costs? Is there sort of a target out there?
Of course, we all want it to be 100% funded. I think you all remember in 2002 we were contributing zero to these funds because they were over fully funded. That's always the goal. I know 82% funded maybe seems low, but it's actually similar to OPEB. It's much above a lot of the communities in the state of Michigan. That doesn't make it great, but still it's considered fairly well funded. Of course, best practice would always be 100% on your pensions.
If I could, relatively speaking, our both pension plan as well as employee retiree health plan is much more stabilized in other communities, as the mayor said. So 80%, over 80% funding for a pension plan is outstanding.
Yeah.
So I think it shows the good stewardship that this commission and staff and the pension fund has been using in managing the assets.
And actually, the state of Michigan did pass Public Act 202 a year and a half ago, where now you need to report these things.
Yeah.
And they actually calculate what they consider to be underfunded and we have not met any of those criteria. We're above their criteria, so if you fall below, then you have to create plans to solve that, and we're not in that situation right now, so.
Okay. Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Dode, so looking at the projections moving forward, you keep the income tax and at a fairly flat rate. You know, in the past, it's great to see that our general fund balance is well above our goal of 15%, and our budget stabilization has had the 10% goal, which is, you know, I think last year it was slightly above. This year it's crept back down. And just in anticipation of future, you know, kind of global economic trends going south at some point, as we've you know, kind of seen this unprecedented stretch of growth. You know, wondering about the idea of ratcheting up our unassigned. I mean, I know we're well above for general fund, but trying to you know, as we grow as a community, our income tax base continues to grow at a rate that gives us some cushion. Should we be thinking about putting a little bit aside every year, just in anticipation of, you know, we all, fingers crossed, there's not going to be a giant global recession like the last one, but, you know, we're going to see a flattening at some point, and it certainly will impact us. And so, you know, difficult decisions were made 10 years ago to weather that storm, and want to make sure we're in a good fiscal position to do that. And I don't think we need to make it all up at once, but to try to grow those slightly and prepare for that.
You know me, I'm very conservative, so the more the better for me. And one of our goals is to increase our bond rating as well to a AAA plus. And one of the things they look at is financial reserve. So I think they like to see a 50% plus. So it's a great idea. I still think our income tax receipt growth is conservative, and a lot of that growth is in our compliance area lately. So we're doing a lot better job, you know, matching our returns with the state of Michigan and our federal returns. So I'm hoping to achieve a little better results in income tax, although I still want to be conservative. But anytime we can add to our balances is great, and it gives us options, right? So let's say we want to contribute more to our pension fund one year because we have a surplus. We could potentially do that with you know, extra reserve. So, but you do have to, you know, offset that with the needs of the community and
For sure. But just knowing that we have 22% in our general fund, which is, you know, 7% higher than what our goal is, and we have, you know, we're starting to see our budget stabilization fund creep below that 10%. I mean, if it's, you know, I think that's a discussion for this body then to say, you know, do we think about crafting a change in our policy or a change in our goal to say, you know, as we grow and we have extra, do we start to target a 16% and an 11%, and then if we see receipts grow in an outgoing year, do we set new targets as we
together.
Yeah, as we you know, have done the difficult fiscal things, responsible things to get to this position.
I know we did that last year with the budget stabilization. We did a end of year adjustment because we had some surplus projected, so we did up that, and that's how it got over the 10% limit. So I can see us annually going through this about this time of year to say, you know, is there room to either supplement that or to reserve it for?
So I certainly would be in favor of trying to find a way to increase it 1 point per fund per year, and as a kind of a future forward-looking, you know, again, institutional knowledge matters, and some of us won't always be here. And so the idea that we should codify this in some way so that we know we have a target. It doesn't mean you get there every year, but that we have that projection in the outlying years so that we can be prepared for future uncertainty.
So just, if I could.
Yeah.
Relative to some fiscal context, so a 1% increase on our budget stabilization would be about another 1.4 million, is that right?
I have to calculate it, but.
Roughly.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
So that would mean that we would need to offset some expenses by that same amount.
Right. But we have 22% unassigned fund balance in our general fund,
right,
which, you know, is 7% above our goal. So having some sort of transfer
From the
general fund.
general fund to budget stabilization. So making, so that we're hitting the 15, but we're also hitting the 10.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, or 16 and 11 if it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
and we'll typically look at this after the year closes because you can't transfer if there's not a surplus. So we can
maybe
look
in
at it
July,
again. Sure.
when
Well, the audit won't be completed to probably October-ish when we get those numbers. But we can certainly bring that mid-year as a transfer over. if there was a surplus. The maximum by state law is 20% in budget stabilization, so we do have some room there.
Yeah. Okay. Did I see a hand down here?
Yeah, Jeff, I wanted to ask in the general fund for property tax, you said there was a slow growth in property taxes.
Correct.
What specifically is the reason for that?
Well, it's limited by Proposal A to CPI, which was 2.2 this year, or 5%. So we're capped on that growth. And then there's always the Headley rollback as well, which has been affecting us the last several years. So it doesn't cap the SEV, the actual true value of the house, but it caps the amount of growth in the tax bill value every year. So 2.2 was the most it could go up this year, plus of course the additions for new buildings in construction.
That 2.2 across the board for all houses?
It was 2.2 across the board. Yep, that was the CPI set by the state. So.
Jeff, I have a follow-up question on slide 28 about general fund operating transfers. And I know around this table, we've had this conversation a couple times, especially about 61st District Court. And I know that there was some work on that with an A3. You know, I won't speak for my colleagues, but when I see that line go, you know, 5 million in 2017 to almost 8 in 2024, that's concerning, especially in light of all of the work that's being done statewide and nationally around corrections reform. So I'm curious if we've had any conversations about potential impact on our court in light of some of the work that's happened at the state level around the State Commission on Court Funding, and then the governor just recently put together this bipartisan group looking at corrections. And it may be premature, but I wonder if we as a body need to have a conversation about that sooner than later and see if there are specific things we need to change. I know Commissioner Apart has brought up, as well as community members, about decriminalizing additional offenses and really looking at how we respond to offenses in the city.
I know Eric's been involved in a lot of discussions, so I'll let him answer that particular question.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Mayor, for the question. So the Trial Court Funding Commission has issued their report, and I will distribute it to all of you to take a look at. And it calls for a single funding pool for the state that would be based on caseload, and that would be quite helpful to us. It also calls for the state to take responsibility for certain court costs that would reduce the need for us to have an operating subsidy on an annual basis. Obviously, that's a recommendation of a commission. It's not adopted yet, and it has to go through the legislative process. That's beginning to happen. The chair of the commission has made presentations to the Senate Appropriations Committee and has been answering questions of the House Appropriations Committee, so I know people are thinking about it. And it'll be, I think that's probably our best hope for addressing this. We need to get behind that and make it happen. Locally, we have spent considerable time with our court administrator, who has been very forthcoming, and the chief judge has been very helpful, and we have spent considerable time looking at their budget. And as Jeff explained, it is essentially a revenue problem. The revenue has gone down. They've done a good job of controlling their costs, and so until we see a change in that, the subsidies, there will be a subsidy. And this year, the increase was also due in part to facility rental and maintenance costs increased for their leased space at the court building. And that was really the main driver this year. So they have done a good job of controlling costs that they can control. And they have also done a good job of trying to achieve revenue. But, you know, they're really subject to forces they can't control when it comes to revenue.
As a reminder, they did cut 3 positions last year due to similar discussions we had last year. So they have done a lot, as Eric stated, to control their expenditures over time. We did a long-term analysis, and really the percent increase has not been large over the last 10 to 15 years. It's really, again, the revenue side.
All right, Commissioners, any other questions for Jeff on his portion? If not, I'll turn it back over to our city manager.
Thank you. So as I stated earlier, I'll cover the investments by strategic priority. These are proposed changes. This is the budget that is being presented. It is our best work based on our understanding of the strategic priorities and needs of of this community, and it is yours for consideration, hopefully for adoption or for any other modification. So what I'll do is I'll give you the highlights of the proposed changes, and you will see more in the, as we get into the work sessions, we can go into more detail. But we'll start with our commitment to equitable outcomes and using our equity lens. We have, in terms of the new operating investments for FY 2020, about $3.25 million of that ensures that there are various services that will not only be provided to citizens, but will be done in an equitable manner. If we look at our capital budget for FY 20, and we look at the amount of capital projects that are location-specific, and we're not talking about things that are being done at a wastewater treatment plant that serves the entire city, but just those that are specific to the very specific neighborhoods of focus in which those services are in. About $25 million out of $71 million are related to improving services that are specifically related to neighborhoods of focus. And as I mentioned earlier, that we have continued funding for the Third Ward Equitable Development Fund that will roll over into FY 20. So beginning with economic prosperity and affordability, a vibrant economy is very important. It is the crux of a good community where everyone can experience that type of economic prosperity and affordability. And if we look at the new investments in some of the areas related to this, we have about $639 million in new operating investments, about $358 million of those are related to the general fund, and I'll talk a little bit more about the staffing that's needed to move the needle forward in this area, and some of the capital services, capital projects. So the first I'd like to highlight, it relates to our strategic plan in terms of making it easy to do business in Grand Rapids. In our planning development office last year, there was an ombudsperson in the development center, but this person was not funded full-time as a FTE, and so we've had good experience with that program, had good feedback from some of our customers, and we would like to operationalize that program and convert that, have a position that is full-time within the budget. In addition to support business growth and retention, which is another outcome that we said we strategically wanted, we are planning to, there is funding in the budget that would allow us to increase our investment in small business recruitment and development efforts. I've talked with our economic development department as well as our partners with DGRI and the Chamber, and we are working on gaining other partners to make sure that we are very aggressive in creating a front door to do business within Grand Rapids. When speaking with the Right Place, they do an excellent job of helping the region in economic growth and attracting large manufacturing and industrial employers to the region. And those jobs may not be specifically in Grand Rapids, and so we will benefit from some of the economic prosperity from the regional growth, but we benefit most directly when those jobs are located inside our city, where they're paying property taxes and income taxes, and looking at the opportunities for businesses to be in what is many vacant retail storefronts. We want to start an initiative where we're very aggressively helping businesses develop in Grand Rapids, but also recruiting businesses from other communities that are looking to expand, that are doing well in other parts of the state and other parts of the country, that are looking to have a presence in Grand Rapids, inviting them, being very forward and asking them to do business here in Grand Rapids. And so there is money in the budget to allow us to do that to begin. We don't have a position funded for it, but we are either going to have contractual services or begin subsidizing some part-time staff to help us do that. It's about $100,000. We also want to more closely align our MLBE program, which is an excellent opportunity for businesses to be subcontracting with the city. When I look at the outcomes, the latest report that I received, there was about 30 or so employers that are registered as part of our MLBE program. And there are thousands of businesses in Grand Rapids, and so we need to improve our opportunity to engage both businesses to relocate in Grand Rapids as well as be part of our MLBE program. And so that will be also a part of that business recruitment and expansion effort with the alignment of those areas. With all of the growth that we're experiencing in our planning and development initiatives, particularly with marijuana licensing and processing, and the other planning efforts that we have around improving quality of life in various parts of our communities, we do have a need to add planning staff for capacity to help it for those efforts as well as the upcoming master planning efforts. And finally, I have discussed taking the feedback and the report recommendations that this body has accepted regarding the Heartside Quality of Life study, and have talked to other community partners, and I know that there has been discussion for quite some time around public restrooms in that Heartside area, particularly along Division, and we want to begin to pilot a public restroom facility in that area. And again, we have other partners that are going to help with that pilot. I've spoken with DGRI, the executive director, and others in the community, and we have about $50,000 in the budget as the city's portion of that investment, if needed, to make sure that we actually have an outcome related to comfort stations in the Heartside area. A couple other things. The river restoration continues to be a major project that will be a stabilizer to our economy to ensure that tourism continues to occur, that the jobs that are created, and as well as residents can enjoy just the general quality of life in the downtown area and along the river's edges. We have been really advancing the project with current resources to the degree that we've taken an engineering position that has been reassigned from normal responsibilities and is working full-time on the project. And so what we would like to do is to restore that engineering position back in our stormwater area so they can continue to work on the other projects that they were assigned. We would also propose the continuation of our investment in the river project. I think this year's investment will require us to have about $300,000 as part of our $2 million commitment to the river restoration. So this budget allows us to continue our public investment, and we know that we're partners with the county and other private investors as well as the state and federal agencies, and so we want to continue to maintain our commitment. Regarding housing, one of the things that I noted in coming here was that we had a lot of departments working on our housing initiatives. We had our planning department working on our land use, and economic development department that was working on incentives for developers, and we have a community development department that works a lot with our residents and some of the programs that we have, but we really had no singular person whose sole responsibility was to focus on housing, be our housing expert all the time, not ancillary to some of the other duties that they had. And I think years ago we had a housing officer in the city, and perhaps the housing needs were not as great as they are now, to where that job was, and I can't speak to what happened years ago, but whatever it is, it doesn't exist now. And
We are well aware of that.
It doesn't exist now. And we need to do that. So what I'd like to do is begin allocating some funding, perhaps either for future staffing or contractual services, that we can have a housing expert that can provide leadership, particularly as we transition the Kent County Land Bank to the city, and working with the state, as well as working with us on all of our other housing strategies, in addition to the wind down of the land bank, but other housing initiatives. And finally, this budget continues our investment in, as well as investment in other partners, in making sure that we remain a destination city. And it adds the Phase 2 portion of the plaza portion of Lion Square and that restoration. And what about $1.4 million in the second phase of the project, and the DDA is also contributing about $5 million for that project as well. Regarding mobility, I heard a lot of discussion coming in to the community about our challenges with transit and mobility. And this budget has about $2 million in investments in operations with one position, but also the majority of the investments in mobility are on the capital side, about $21 million. And of that $21 million, about $4.5 million are allocated for areas where people who live in neighborhoods of focus will be able to take advantage of those opportunities. So in terms of our multimodal transportation, this year we are continuing our investment with the Dash Circulator, Route 19, and Silver Line, and this is a full year's funding. I think my understanding, this was known when those routes were initiated, that it would require an additional funding, and there's about another $1.8 million in additional contractual service to pay for the full year of the Dash, to increase the frequency of those services and make sure that they're able to serve those in our downtown district and throughout our community. There's also a pilot program that we are starting, and hopefully what you see in the picture is an unplowed sidewalk. Street has been plowed, but the sidewalk hasn't been. And so we are going to start a pilot to experiment whether or not we can sustain a citywide, what would it entail to sustain a citywide operation to have a sidewalk plowing and snow removal program. And what we have done is put enough funding in the budget for about 100 miles of sidewalks. We have not determined where those areas will be. Our plan is to make sure that they're evenly distributed between each ward. So 33.33333 miles of sidewalk in each of the wards, and we will, if approved, the staff will be working on developing the strategy for that with Mobile GR, as well as our Public Services Department.
I know.
We're also going to, the position that I proposed earlier will be helping with a lot of our multimodal and transit type of planning services. That will be working on car sharing and the bus shelter implementation. I hadn't talked about that. We're going to have the expansion of another 50 bus shelters as part of this year's budget, but also improving transit stops. So some of the capital programming is to improve over 100 stops throughout the city, and we'll make sure that those are equitably distributed throughout the various wards as well as oversee our pilot of our sidewalk maintenance program. And we'll continue to ensure that we have a customer responsive parking system, and we have funding in this budget to expand our parking inventory if the projects are approved. So this is depending on projects, but city's participation for about 500 additional parking spots that are newly constructed, and there's enough there will be enough money for additional 300 lease spots based on, in conjunction with the Celebration Cinema development. So we're looking at potentially 500 to 800 new parking spots available downtown. Now, this is in addition. If you recall, we had some earlier conversations upon my arrival about expanding the metering hours for parking downtown on evenings and weekends, and we pushed pause on that to integrate whatever that strategy would be for parking solutions with the budget, along with a study that we're conducting now with our equitable economic development efforts. And so this is a very deliberate effort to increase the parking inventory downtown. In addition to the parking inventory increasing, we're also continuing the investment in our vital streets projects. And I've just listed some here, but I think they're listed in detail in your budget book, all 61 projects. And they will cover some 31 miles of street improvements that will either be rehabilitation, reconstructions, and combined with some other public works, water and wastewater projects. And so that investment is $13.2 million in capital projects for streets and related types of reconstructions. Safe community, and this will be the last section. I'll pause here and obtain any comments or questions that you might have. Even though I want to put something in perspective, as you saw earlier when we were reviewing the general operating fund, what you see is about $3 million in new operating investments in areas that relate to safety. But I want to remind the commission that combined, both police and fire budgets are all approximately 60% of the general operating fund when you look at those departments together. But even with that, in line with our strategic plan, we do still believe that there are additional investments that are needed to make sure that our community remains safe. And so what I'm proposing is to use the money that was allocated for, that we have been allocating, $1 million for 10 positions. And I'll talk a little bit about that in light of the deployment study here shortly. But let me begin with emergency preparedness, which is another focus of our plan. There are things that can be done to improve safety outside of traditional policing in fire response and preparedness. And one of them, it relates to traffic safety, improving and pedestrian safety, improving the markings on streets. And we have money in the budget to do that, about $220,000 to expand our durable pavement marking program. And we also want to elevate preparedness by adding one position. Our fire chief does a great job of coordinating our emergency response efforts. And when we had the polar vortex, and the chief was great. He was working with every single department. And one of the things that I noted was that if it were an actual fire, then we would be resource constrained, because the chief would need to focus on the operations of his department. And so our community is growing enough to where it makes sense, like other large communities, to have an emergency preparedness professional. This would be one position. This position would also work not only in the fire department, but emergencies are not just natural disaster. There could be related to water, wastewater. They could be related to cyber issues. They could be related to a host of things that we would need emergency responsiveness efforts. And so this position will help us with that, as well as helping on event coordination and any needs that the police department might have. So this would be a very utilized and versatile position. We also are continuing our improvement of various intersections and traffic areas to improve our pedestrian experiences. there's funding in the budget for pedestrian hybrid beacons at various locations throughout the city to improve our efforts for Vision Zero, as well as capital elements for replacing traffic signals and other instrumentation. So I'll highlight just a couple other things, and then we'll move on to things that are specifically related to the deployment. In terms of other areas of safety, ensuring our capability to have effective response times, and we have great personnel that works part of our dispatch unit. We have to also make sure that our equipment and technology is up to date, and there is money in the budget to upgrade our backup system to 800 megahertz and to be able to transfer if needed, to make sure we have a reliable backup for our capability to dispatch. I want to just add that this does not include the decision to encrypt. At this point, that's a policy discussion that we are having, and I know that there are other communities around here that are concerned about people in the public responding to critical incidents and knowing about them at the same time first responders are doing that. And there could be a risk for the safety of personnel, city personnel, as well as personnel in other first responder community. There's a balance between encrypting as well as being transparent, and that's not a conversation that we need to have today, but we do need to have money in the budget to ensure that we have the capability to upgrade our technology. There's also funding for an evidence-based violence reduction program. We have not decided yet on that initial provider of that program. As you're aware, there is an assessment right now that is ongoing with Cure Violence, but there is funding in the budget to make sure that we not only do our traditional policing efforts, but we do everything we can for violence reductions. I've been keeping track of the number of homicides that have happened this year. I think Chief Kittle had informed me we're at 6 so far. And last year we were at about 9. And so I know some months we'll go for several months without any homicides, but one is too many. And so we're going to do what we can to be preventive of all efforts of violence, not only gun violence, but all efforts of violence. We welcome those initiatives. So that's about $75,000 that we've programmed in this proposed budget. Let me also, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about 61st District Court. We just talked about that. Our CFO highlighted, and Mr. DeLone highlighted one of the reasons for the increase is the cost of the leased facilities. Their cost went up about $460,000, and so we had to ensure that we were able to continue to sustain those services from the court. And there are investments in 20 replacement vehicles for the police department, about $780,000. There's investments in this budget to begin, as we talk about river restoration and knowing that we're going to activate the river and bring that project online, we have to start getting our first responders prepared to respond to some of the incidents in the river. And I think during St. Patrick's Day weekend, we did have a drowning, and we depended on other agencies to assist. We're very thankful for that, but spoke with the fire chief about what our capability would be and our response time would be if we had assets and the ability to have a swifter response and rescue response, and the response time, as I understand it, would be significantly improved. But we can't wait until we start having people along the river's edge. We have to start preparing our first responders for that. So this budget adds some of the equipment that is needed for dive and rescue and training, and ensures that we have that capability not only upon river activation, but as we see incidents occur in the river right now. And there is funding in the budget to replace some of the fire apparatus of about $1.5 million. So let me delve into our efforts regarding community-oriented policing. There's been a lot of discussion around this topic. And we received the report from Hillard Hines last commission meeting about the deployment study. And in that report, the consultants did identify that our department is understaffed and in need of resources, but their recommendation, in summary, was to provide additional staffing that are civilian support services that would allow the officers to provide more traditional policing and doing things that would allow them to prevent incidents from occurring or enforcing the law. And so while we are beginning to, still in the phase of recruiting for a new police chief, the application period closed on the 19th. Had recent conversations with our search firm. He still continues to vet the candidate pool, but feels very strongly that there are very qualified candidates that will do a fine job for us in our community. I would prefer to wait to do everything in the police department when a new police chief arrives, but I don't have the luxury to wait. We have to adopt this budget by May 23rd. So I want to, while we're not going to implement everything that is recommended in the deployment study, the police department, police chief will have an opportunity to address the many recommendations. I just want to begin by fiscally reserving some funding for a few redeployment strategies. So one would be to create additional resources for the police department by allowing the chief to deploy 3 civilians to wherever the police department thinks the need is the greatest to provide additional support for sworn officers. And those civilians providing that staffing support should allow the officers to be redeployed somewhere in operations. My preference is consistent with the request that has been made by the police department, by the current chief, as well as current interim chief and the previous chief for community policing. As I understand, the ask was for 10 officers to create a second shift for community policing. So my hope is that if this commission approves this budget, we'll be able to redeploy 3 officers based on 3 civilians being able to support those areas where those officers were primarily performing administrative-like duties, but also add 2 additional sworn officers as part of this budget. Even though the consultant did not recommend the addition of sworn officers, we have to crawl before we walk. So we're not able to implement all the recommendations and redeploy all at one time. And so my recommendation of adding 2 officers is contingent upon the ability to redeploy 3 officers to create a second shift for community policing. I do not condone any bifurcating of that recommendation if we cannot get to the ultimate point of creating more officers for community policing. So there are 5 sectors in the city. The community police officers only work during the daytime, and I trust, even though this is not ideal, that our interim police chief and our new police chief will be able to begin to strategize how can we enhance our efforts for community policing. I understand that community policing is not the assignment of one detail, it's the assignment of every single officer, and we will eventually get there, but we have to start somewhere. I also am recommending in this proposed budget that we have additional support in helping officers solve crimes. What I've heard in talking to the officers, going to the roll calls, listening, the detective unit has expressed the need for help in solving crimes. The recommendation was again, from the consultant, was not to add sworn officers, but crime analysts. And so the department only has one right now. And so this would triple their ability to have analytical resources for administrative support in solving crimes, and if the chief decides that the analysts need to be deployed in another area outside the detective unit, I'm willing to give the department that flexibility as long as it improves our ability to support the officers. But those are the two civilian crime analyst positions that I'm proposing. There is another resource that I think it's good for both the department and the police, department and community, and it is a crisis intervention and behavioral health specialist. This is a second responder. So this is the person that would be able, not the next day, not 2 days later, not the next week, not after you get on someone's referral list to see who's available to help, but a department resource that the chief could deploy at an incident that he and the watch commander thought was necessary to provide services to victims on the scene of the incident and to the officers. Officers also experience trauma. And this position, in the absence of an event, would also be available to the officers to help them with their mental health and post-traumatic experience and well-being. Right now, it's peer support as well as external referral sources, but this would be an internal resource available to the police department. This is not uncommon in other growing departments. These are resources that I have seen in both communities that I have served in. And not the last, but getting close, and then I'll pause. We'll also, in this budget, have a position that is being proposed to be in the executive office that will work with our departments, particularly with the police department, about improving our engagement with community on public safety issues and public safety relations, ensuring transparency, ensuring trust, resident voice, and accountability, serving as that liaison. And I would rather have this done internally than to have the state or the federal government provide some type of mandatory oversight or special investigative oversight. I think having this resource within the city but outside of the department gives us a better feel of transparent, gives us a better opportunity to be transparent in engaging our residents, and hopefully we'll be able to begin to restore some of this trust. I've looked at this budget back and forth, and I've thought about it and thought ways of not doing it, and I just can't consciously sit back and not do anything and do the same things that we have been doing. We've made a lot of progress, and this is not to discount or minimize any of the efforts that the police department has made. Our officers do an outstanding job. We cannot have a safe community without having safe officers, but we have to, this is one of the tools. This is not the answer. We still have other recommendations that we have to deploy from the 21st century task force study. This position will also help with that. We have some realistic expectations we need to build with our Citizens Appeal Board. This position will help with that. And so this is a resource that is needed right now. The police chief reports directly, and police chief and fire chief reports directly to the manager. I need some help in my office to help oversee those departments. Additionally, we have 2 police recruit classes that helps with our anticipated officer attrition. Our staffing level for the department is at right around 295 officers. The chief has informed me that he anticipates a large number of retirements and various attrition, and so being proactive, we can begin to staff for that upcoming succession planning effort. And I will stop there and see what questions you might have about any of the first 3 areas before we move forward.
All right. Commissioners, questions on those sections? Commissioner O'Connor?
For the emergency preparedness position, will that be independent of an agency? Will that be housed in the fire department and the police department? How will that position work?
Yep, I thought about that in two ways. I think initially, since this was the fire chief's request, the fire chief came to me upon my arrival requesting this position. We will start in the fire department, see how that works. If our fire chief can play well in the sandbox with the other departments, which he has proven he can, I think that can be a resource manager out of the department. In other cities, it has been outside of a particular department, it has been an executive office. But this was, I will give our chief credit, this is a request of the fire chief. So it will be in his office.
I think he's smiling back there. I think that means yes.
Question.
Yes, that he can play nice in the sandbox, I mean. Commissioner?
City Manager, do you think that one crisis intervention specialist would be efficient?
I think it's a start. In my understanding, there's other resources that we have with the Family Outreach Center and several other support services that the city is able to call and deploy. Right now, I don't know the appropriate number, but it is a tall order for one person, and obviously the person will need to coordinate with the behavioral health community to ensure that there are resources, volunteers, but that are more rapidly ready and accessible. So in other communities, yes, I've seen more than one person staffed to a function like this, but I think this is a start.
City Manager, I'll just follow up on that question. I know that in our community, there's a lot of conversations going on right now and have been for some time, and I think it was mid last year we got an update on this. Our fire department has been engaged in our police department talking about how do we better respond to individuals who are suffering from a mental health crisis or substance use, and that there are models in other cities where you divert those individuals from jail or from arrest to more appropriate services to meet their immediate needs. So would this person assist in some of those conversations and be a liaison with that work, or would that still be happening independent with both the departments?
So I don't want to over prescribe exactly the scope of the position, because it's a tall order for one position. I think the initial focus was to provide acute mental health behavior support on the scene to victims, and then do referral to make sure all the support services are there, and then also to be available for officers internally. In terms of the strategy around criminology and jail diversion, I think they can certainly be part of that discussion. I'm not expecting that person to be the sole champion of that. And so that will require more conversation.
All right, thanks. All right, other questions, Commissioner?
A couple questions. Thank you, City Manager, for this overview. I have a question regarding the additional 50 bus shelters. It's on slide 37. I know we had talked in the past about modifying or upgrading those bus shelters. So is the 50 additional, then what's the total? And have they begun doing that work already? I know it's been a couple years and we've been delaying it each year. So to see that we're adding an additional 50, I'm just curious to know the status of the others.
So thank you for the question. I don't know the total inventory. I'll defer to the staff, but also to be mindful, we are going to come back with any questions that we are unable to answer today. So let's not feel like we have to scramble if we don't readily have that answer.
Sure.
Mr. DeLong?
You read my mind, Mr. Manager. So, yes, we've been working on this for some time, and it's taken a time to iron out the partnership between us and the Rapid and get a design and that kind of stuff, but we're making good progress now. We're ready to go. We had money allocated last year, and we have this money allocated this year, And so when we do our capital presentation, we'll be able to tell you exactly what the plan is.
Eric, I'll add, though, serving on the Rapid board, the Rapid has allocated funds for bus shelter improvements, and that is moving forward. And Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc. has also allocated funds, and that, too, is moving forward. So I just want to let you know, other partners
The
are already
entities are
working.
still at the table. So have we begun the work? Is that something we know the answer to?
We have not yet
Okay.
begun.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is regarding the Third Ward Equity Development Fund, this is on slide 31. So, as appreciative as I am for the allocation in this current fiscal budget, the $750,000 was allocated probably 7 to 10 days prior to the adoption of the budget, and it was allocated after the budget had been developed and the plans had been in place, which made it challenging to find the dollars. And so I was extremely hopeful that as we've made the assessment that there had been a lot of capital investments, specifically in other wards, impacting very specific things in other wards, that once we learn about that inequity, that we would allocate resources to the Third Ward to try and bring balance. When that did not happen last year, and we were, Mr. DeLong was able to find resources to create this fund at $750,000. I'm extremely grateful for that. But I was hoping that with this, after having a year to work on our budget, that we would have allocated more resources, understanding that there had been an imbalancement with some of the more ward-specific projects in years past. So just wanted to mention that here today, and I know we'll talk in more depth about some of these issues later, so I just wanted to kind of mention it at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we did take your feedback to heart. And now that we've reversed those work sessions, the next one, we will talk about equity and capital investments. But this year, I just wanted to reemphasize a point I made earlier, that of the $71 million on the capital investments that are specific to areas, 25 million are invested in neighborhoods of focus. Now, we do the ward allocation, and I think we will do that, particularly among the infrastructure projects. And I saw a stat on that yesterday, that every year the ward allocation is different, but overall, the programming distribution by the end of the capital campaign is equitable, or is equal. And there's a difference between equal and equitable, but based on need. And so I do look forward to delving into those particulars around both the ward allocation as well as allocations based on neighborhoods of focus.
Thank you for that. I know we've been working really hard on, especially with infrastructure, making sure that there's balance in the contracts that we're agreeing to and things of that nature. I think it's more of those capital improvements. And I know in some of the preliminary discussions, it was looking as though there are about 20 million in capital improvements in First and Second Ward, and within this budget, and about 6 million for Third Ward. So again, I just, I think as we're having the conversation about equity, those are some of the things we have to look at is, okay, what's the bottom line each time? So we don't end up in the same predicament.
All right, Commissioner?
Yeah, just a couple things. I wanted to mention that this pilot program around winter sidewalk maintenance, it might be possible, I know this is a pilot, but to also consider how the SIDS could contribute at some point, the corridor improvement districts. And just wanted to note that that is a very much an age-friendly goal, because we are having a demographic change. And then regarding the slide number 40, the durable pavement markings, just a real appreciation for that, because we did roll out Vision Zero, And we have been hearing for several years now that the crosswalks sometimes don't get painted until August, September, and then we get snow on them. So the more we can do to get that done earlier, given our seasons here in the city, the better. So it's really exciting to see that we're going to work on that.
And thank you for that, those observations. I neglected to share earlier on the sidewalk maintenance program that one of the criterias in terms of, or several other criteria in terms of programming will be used, but one of them will be those sidewalks that are close to areas where we have a high concentration of seniors. The other will be sidewalks near the bus stops where our children are able to catch the bus for school. I think last year was a record number of closures for the school, and now that was across the state, but one of the factors that I understand in talking to the superintendent and her staff, they consider is accessibility of sidewalks and be able to catch the bus and making those closure decisions.
Great. City Manager, I'm assuming it's on that same slide, 40, looking at the pilot program for an evidence-based violence reduction program, $75,000. I haven't seen the final report. My guess is that wouldn't cover all the costs, and we would be using that as match funding for grants.
That's right. That would be our portion of participation that could be for either grant funding or philanthropy or any other community-based organization that wishes to partner with us.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, matter of fact, I've heard numbers 8 to 10 times that amount. And I think what we want to do is be responsible in our initial exploration, because we have a lot of moving parts at this point.
Yeah, thanks. Commissioner Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you also, Mr. City Manager, for your explanation, and I want to applaud the inclusion, I think it's slide 33, of the business ombudsperson. I think all of us here on the dais have, in some way, form, or fashion, heard from folks in the community about sometimes the difficulties of trying to navigate, small business licensing and such, and so the opportunity to create an ombudsperson's position, I think, is right on target, as well as, I think, the rather intentional efforts around small business recruitment, development, and retention. I applaud that decision as well, because, to your point, we have a number of entities that work to perhaps draw businesses to the region, but there's never any real guarantee that they will end up in Grand Rapids. So I think it's okay to be rather intentional there. And also want to recognize the importance of the inclusion of the two admin analysts for planning. I will say, ever since we, have been in discussions around, when we're creating the language around for marijuana, there was always the understanding that, there would be a need for more personnel in planning, and I would foresee that that's going to increase in terms of their busyness with the as things roll out for the recreational use. And so thank you for that. And wanted to also ask the question about in-mobility. Just really wanting to hear, I know there's nothing in the budget this year, but just any thoughts around future budgets around the May mobility and the idea of, of focusing on the autonomous vehicles. And we have an initial investment by way of the Smart Zone, but just wanted to ask about that.
So thank you, Commissioner, for that feedback and the question. I think the transportation planner that we have included in the budget will help with that effort as well, in terms of the autonomous vehicle efforts and the ride share. I would have to defer to the staff for more details on any other things that I may not have highlighted that would support, even though it may not be a new investment, that would support the efforts of May Mobility. So I'll defer to Mr. DeLong or Mr. Nairmore.
So I think that would be a great topic, again, to talk about during the capital section and when we talk about mobility. But our Director of Mobility, Mobile GR, Josh Naramore, is very current on those investments. And we are involved in a variety of learning about that. So May Mobility is one pilot. We also participate on a statewide basis on the Michigan Council for Future Mobility and are working together, pilots here. And you might recall that we were the test site for the Ford Cities of Tomorrow Challenge and are working in that area. So we're thinking about how does our intelligent transportation system and our GIS and all of our infrastructure work to support connected and autonomous vehicle deployment. And that's a discussion that's happening at the state level too.
Thank you.
But in addition to the autonomous vehicles, but some of the other smart solutions that we hope the position will work with us on is the e-share for bikes and cars as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. All right, Commissioner?
I just too want to express my appreciation. There's a few things in there that are very important to me, the public restroom in Hartside, the housing position, the sidewalks, among many other things. But most importantly, I want to just thank you, City Manager Washington, for taking the many strands of input and recommendations around public safety, twisting them up and trying to put them through a sewing needle. And so I know that took a lot of effort to balance all that. And so I think that we've got a great proposal to begin discussion around that. And I want to thank you for your work on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Earlier today in community development, we were talking with the Parks Department, and they were talking about a bathroom facility that's an inexpensive bathroom facility. I can't remember at which park, but I wonder if that may be something to consider for the pilot of a restroom facility in Hartside. And it's a combination of porta potty with some enclosure or something of that nature, but three parts. So I think, that may be something to consider as we're trying to figure out where's the best location. Maybe we should do something that's a little bit more temporary. So we were excited to kind of hear that earlier today, so I thought I'd mention it here.
Good, yeah, and we certainly can look at, we have not landed on the location yet, and so we can look at the feasibility of both city-owned and non-city-owned facilities.
All right. So City Manager, did you want to keep moving on, or did you want to take a 2-minute break? Does anyone need to use the
Commission need a
restroom?
break?
Or
Break?
let's take a break.
5 minutes?
Let's use restroom and refill your coffee, and we'll be right back in here in 2 minutes. So be quick. Don't make phone calls.
I'm still learning.
All right, so I will turn it back over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners. The second half should go a lot faster. And I don't want to rush anything, but I think just to be responsive to the questions we have, we do have some update on the question around May mobility. I'm going to ask Mr. Long to give us an update.
Thank you, City Manager. To update everybody on May Mobility, so the pilot is a one-year pilot. It's $650,000 for the overall pilot. The city's share of that through GR Mobile, our Mobile GR, is $250,000. So a private sector investment of $400,000 that we'll be doing in partnership with the company and also with Stargard. So the pilot will start in July of this year, and there'll be a rollout leading up to that, and then it'll last for a year till June of 2020. So we'll have a summer experience, a fall experience, winter and spring. And we'll see how it goes and evaluate after that and know where we're headed after that.
All right, thank you. You're welcome. Okay, and I didn't highlight earlier, part of the additional efforts for accountability, transparency, that was consistent with 21st century CP report. And so what we will do when we come to that session, we'll try to outline the recommendations from the 21 CP report as well as deployment study to see what recommendations are still outstanding and what efforts we are initially addressing in this study, in this budget.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Commissioner, did you have any?
Well, no, that's great. I had actually thought about this as you were talking about it, because it's easy to lose sight of that, and I think at some point we need to do that with the housing recommendations too. We got stalled a bit with hiring a new manager and with talking about zoning at length, but there are still the recommendations out there, so I think that's an excellent plan.
Health and environment. What you'll see here is primarily investments, or the majority of the investments are in capital, almost $58 million, but there is operating additions of about $1 million that include 9 positions, primarily the bulk of them for the biodigestion resource. So real briefly, in terms of our responsibility for reducing carbon emissions and maintaining climate resiliency, we are going to convert 30 parking lots that are owned by the city all to LED lighting. And that will, that'll be about $250,000 in funding, and that will be paid out of our Mobile GR fund. We are also going to have a position that will support our energy and sustainability and performance management efforts. Consistent with our strategic planning process, I identified a project manager, and that is our now sustainability and performance manager, Sutter, who's been leading that effort, but she's really been tasked with 2 jobs, helping with sustainability as well as performance management. And to ensure that our plan has accountability and not just something we revisit occasionally, but really operationalize it, get it down into the DNA of the organization, to make sure that it's aligned down to the individual person performing the task. We need some support. And so Ms. Sutter will begin working 60% on performance management, 40% on sustainability, and hire someone who will spend about 60% of their time on sustainability efforts and 40% or so on performance management. There's also additional staffing for an apprentice earn and learn forestry aid position to increase capacity. We recognize the need to do that as a result of some of the many downfalling trees and limbs and things that we need to ensure that we have good, vibrant green spaces in our community. We also are increasing our capacity at the cemetery. We're going to improve our ability to treat some of the invasive species that are attacking our trees at the cemetery, as well as have 2 people that were temporary workers that will now be working full-time. One of them in which we had a decision that, a recommendation, outcome from arbitration that indicated we needed to consider converting the position to full-time. We also have continued funding for our parks millage. And there are 13 parks that we're planning to program and improve as part of the millage, and about $3.5 million, as well as a third ward park acquisition. Kind of related to Commissioner Lanier's point earlier, this is an additional investment to create park land and acquiring in the third ward. This is $300,000, and that's in addition to the $750,000 for the third ward equity fund. As well as the investment in the Martin Luther King Jr. Park Lodge. While we have a long-term capital initiative for developing that asset, this will provide some initial capital, long-needed improvement, and about $200,000 is in the capital fund for the MLK Lodge. And the development of the Hastings non-motorized trail, this item has come before the commission a couple of times, and this is the city's commitment for match funding of about $725,000 for that trail. In terms of protecting our water resources, we are continuing to do that and upgrading our storm equipment to make sure we maintain the Storm C investment level, and there's about $1 million in capital improvements from our major and local street operations fund for that effort. There's also some contractual services that we're going to increase to prevent the erosion of soil and land. As I mentioned earlier, the 4 positions that have been identified as part of the project for the biodigestion plant, as well as some other infrastructure work that would allow us to upgrade facilities and replace equipment, pumping stations at the North Monroe location. That's about over $7 million of capital work, as well as replacing water service lines of about $1 million, 5% of all the funds. And there's also some reconstruction of some stormwater and sanitary sewer assets. And we will detail those projects when we come back and talk about the capital budget. Our final area is governmental excellence. And there's about $1.5 million in investments in governmental excellence with 6 new positions, and the majority of the work in there is maintaining our current facilities and assets, about $14 million. Just to remind the commission of some of the work that we did that did not require new positions, and that's part of efficiency and making sure that we are operating our government as efficiently as possible. I took and repurposed a vacant managing director position to repurpose it to create an assistant city manager to add additional responsibility for the executive oversight of the position. We have Mr. Matthews here in that role. And you'll see the areas in which there'll be some focus areas to provide oversight to those roles. But we've also added the innovation function to our customer service director's role to make that position the chief customer service innovation officer. Highlighted the performance management changes, as well as realigned the cable TV video team to be reassigned to the Office of Communication. That's consistent with, I believe, the study that was done. The consultant firm escapes me now from some time ago prior to last year's adopted budget. We've also embedded equity within the organization by doing several things, making sure that we increase our focus in creating a equity office. I've taken the assistant city manager of my office to not only Ms. Stacy Sal to be responsible for the neighborhood programming, but also to elevate the focus on equity. And we need to begin now with ensuring that everyone has common language in our organization, that capacity. I think that's one of the strategies we identified in the plan, and there's money to begin that diversity, inclusion, and equity training that will be mandated for all leaders, and it will be a day or so kind of course where we can get a large percent of the organization through some initial exposure to equity in all departments, leadership levels in every single department, public, sworn and non-sworn. We've also continuing our fiscal sustainability, maintaining our standards for our electronic financial transactions and making sure that our payment card transactional system remains compliant for our mobile GR parking services, as well as our controller's office has indicated a need for some support comptroller's office has indicated needed some support in our area, and our assistant city attorney has indicated that our city attorney has indicated that she would like to reduce or balance the reliance for outside counsel and have more capacity to do more things in-house, and hopefully result in a cost savings, or if not, some greater efficiencies. And we also have added a position in our budget office. I mentioned earlier we have an outstanding financial staff, and we're going to be doing more to integrate our financial management and performance management functions together, and there's some additional capacity that's needed for that. I remain committed to our workforce and our employees, and I am unfortunately unable to unveil any of the much-needed investments to ensure that we recruit, retain, develop, compensate high-performing employees, and because the labor negotiations are ongoing, I look forward to the successful conclusion of those contracts in that endeavor. But we are going to do some things outside of that. We're going to begin piloting a system that will help us to hire employees in a more innovative way. Our HR department asked for resources to help with employment entrance testing that model some of the experiences that have been used by St. Mary's Health System that removes some of the bias from some of the hiring processes. We also have a wellness coordinator citywide, and hopefully this position will pay for itself in reducing the cost of healthcare, helping employees manage their health and chronic conditions, use appropriate meds, and this is similar to what is being done in many other corporations, having an internal wellness focus. And as much as we think of ourselves as the public sector and government, we are a municipal corporation, and I'm not just city manager, I am the chief executive officer, and some of the other things, the same things that are affecting other corporations around costs, employee costs, pension, healthcare, are the same things that are affecting us, and this is a trend that is being done and being used in other large employers to maintain and manage their healthcare costs. There are a couple other positions that will be opportunities to create pipeline for diversifying our workforce both in skill as well as representation. We have 2 trade positions in our facilities and fleet department that we're proposing, as well as restoration of the Calder Stabile. And that investment is over $300,000. We are moving forward to ensure that we have the type of technology and performance management that we need to ensure innovation and business intelligence throughout the organization. I won't spend a lot of time on those areas. We'll unpack those a little bit more at our next session. We also have some smart type of projects with street lighting that will help us become more energy efficient as part of our operations. And finally, from our conversations with the strategic plan, This is an initial investment to begin scoping out the master plan, approximately $200,000. We had $50,000 in last year's budget, and we wanted to be a little bit more deliberate about the type of resources that would be needed to take on such an endeavor, and so there's an increase in funding for master plan scoping. I've spoken earlier about my commitment to employees, and that remains. This is the last section on engaging connected community. And I will be very brief. We have resources for contractual services, both for external survey, where we can start working with community members to gauge a common understanding of how they think we are performing across all departments. And so part of the community survey will be assessing our responses to public safety, the community's perception. I know we do that to some degree right now, but both for police, for fire, for traffic safety, getting satisfaction about water quality, park services, their experience with government, responsiveness, and all of the other community services that we have, code enforcement, housing services. So that will be an annual survey externally. We'll also have an internal survey for employee satisfaction that we'll be able to use to measure whether or not the level of engagement in our workforce, and that'll allow us to be a little bit more deliberate in how we direct resources internally and externally. There's also investments in this budget to increase accessibility and having closed captions for city broadcasts, which will be an enhancement, as well as marketing our Parks Department and using social media. And I think there's a matching, requires a matching grant fund for the department that we've previously discussed with this commission. There's also some restricted funding for our cable TV and community programming area that we will discuss in more detail. We've made a commitment to make sure that we're as deliberate as possible with the 2020 census, and there is over $100,000 that is earmarked to make sure that we engage our communities that may have concerns or fears about how information might be used. And so we're going to be very deliberate, because we know if we do this right, the return will be exponential in the type of federal and state funding that we can get that will, if we accurately reflect our growth as a community. There's also investments to increase the neighborhood fund match. I mentioned that earlier, about $25,000, as well as investments to procure e-poll laptop books, book laptops, I'm sorry, and voter ballot tabulators for our clerk's office, and the dollar amount escapes me at this moment. So in conclusion, this budget, as we committed to, I believe it does advance equitable outcomes. We are very deliberate in looking at equity and developing the budget as part of our fiscal lens. It has an exceptional value, as there is a slight reduction in the tax rate. I don't think we highlighted that earlier. It enhances our economic development, as well as enhances our public safety and community relations, as well as accomplishes our increased environmental monitoring and asset management for our water and wastewater assets at a modest rate increase, and ensures our commitment to our infrastructure and streets and parks in elevating the quality of life for all residents. Again, I remind you of the schedule. We will reverse the conversations for April 30th and May 7th based on the feedback we've had earlier. We've taken note of some of the questions already that we need to explore. What I'd like to do now is pause and see if there are any questions about anything that the last three sections or so that I've just talked about, and other specific sections that you would like us to address in the future in more detail. And just as a matter of protocol, outside of the commission meeting, if there are questions about the proposed budget, I think to help us in our organizational efficiency and communication, if you could send your questions either to me or the CFO, and we will make sure we engage the appropriate departments, because in many instances, there are multiple departments that are assigned to an outcome area, and we want to make sure that we don't respond in silos. And so I think having our executive office and our CFO work with our performance management office gives us the best organizational view in terms of responding comprehensively to all of your questions. Okay, Mayor?
Thank you. So that's very helpful. So Commissioners, a couple things, and then I'll turn to see if you have questions about the last couple sections that the city manager highlighted for us. So this budget process is a little bit different than what we've done in the past. So I don't know about you. I haven't been able to get through all 500 pages. I'm about 160 pages in. So I have some more time with this budget scheduled. But as you read through the budget or as you think about what was presented today, please send your questions directly to the city manager and the CFO. If you have additional areas that you would like brought forward or need more information on, please get that to them as soon as possible so that they have time to gather the information and get it to us before the commission meeting. And then if there are things that you feel were not covered, also please let the city manager know that.
And Mayor, just for creating realistic expectations, we will do our best. If you send it to us in advance, if we get it by Thursday before the meeting, that might give us enough time, depending on how complex the question is. But if it's ones that requires a lot of research and a lot of time, we may need to evaluate and make sure that is something that won't take all of our resources to respond to. Another thing that is helpful, the more questions we get a sense of publicly from the dais, the more that we can know if it's a concern of a commissioner or if it's a concern of the commission as a whole, that will allow us to really make sure that we are being as responsive as we can to the entire commission.
Great, thank you. So Commissioners, any questions about those last three sections? I know the one that I wrote down as you were talking, City Manager, I'm curious, when is, I see the positions connected to the biodigester, which I was aware of early on when we approved the funding for the biodigester. But I'm curious, when is that supposed to be ready to go and move forward? Is that yet this fiscal year? Or I mean, not this fiscal year, but this year, this calendar year?
I think the staffing, as I understand it, would be for this calendar year. So we would delay the staffing, and we had talked about that. Would they need to be staffed by January, or I can't remember the exact month. Deputy City Manager Long, can you help me with that recollection?
I'll do my best. So we want to get the staffing on board because we want the people to be trained and acclimated by the time we turn on the machine.
When are we turning on the machine?
Well, that's what I'm getting to. So I think for the best answer to that, we should bring Tom Almonte forward. So if he's here.
I'm going to have to ask my staff in future meetings to sit to the front so that we ask citizens not to take the long stroll from the back.
I'm going to try to address that tonight.
We are on schedule the biodigestion should begin go online by the end of the year, and we should be producing gas beginning first quarter of next year.
Nice.
So that's the plan, if nothing changes.
Okay. And as of right now, Tom, we're on schedule?
We are on schedule for the construction to be completed by, we're estimating October, November.
Great.
And March, April, we should be producing gas.
Wow.
So.
Awesome. Can't wait. Thanks. Commissioners, other questions? Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, I just have one. We talked earlier about the dispatch and not having encryption because of that balance between encryption versus transparency. We've talked about street lighting and smart projects, and I know all along with the street lighting conversation, we have thought that in the future there might be some technological advancements that allow us to help people find parking spots. and we may be talking about traffic control in the future. So all of those things, well, and we've had license plate recognition as well. So my question is, I had always kind of envisioned a role for the Public Safety Committee, now that we have civilians on it as well, to sort of have some oversight and assurances around transparency for the public in this regard. Because these are great advances. At the same time, people worry about want to know that we're not selling information to people who, in the private sector, who might want to say, oh, Mayor Bliss is going to this area so we can sell her this product, for example. So I'm wondering if that is the role or a combined role perhaps with your position in the executive office, which is going to help us with public safety and community relations and accountability to work together. We had conversations before with the ACLU, for example, and developed a policy so that there is transparency around these new technologies.
Yep.
How do we see the citizens being involved in that? Is it public safety? Is it that position, accommodation?
So that's a very, a very involved and complex issue, and I think it's one that I would probably task Assistant City Manager Matthews in pulling a team of people together that would include, someone from my equity office with the equity lens, someone from public safety in terms of ensuring police community relations, and our IT function, and our innovation office to ensure that we're responsibly implementing innovation. And that's exactly the conversations that we've seen in other people. It's not a person, it's a team of people that will require some kind of executive oversight, and whether or not it's liaisoning with public safety or with another advisory group, because there would need to be some connectivity to the tech community as well. But I want to pause on something. There is some currency around big data that, not necessarily personal data, but there's some value to big data for businesses that the public sector has. And so while we would never want to sell personal history, personal information, I would want us to be mindful as we look at our small business startup and as the government becomes an investor, how we might monetize some of those enterprising opportunities. But never we would want to compromise someone's personal identity.
Great, thank you. City Manager, and follow up to this, and this may already be on the schedule when you go over the capital budget, but it would be nice, I think, for the full commission to get updated on where we are with the investments in the primary circuit and where we are with the LED light conversion and the RFP. I feel like it's been a couple months since we've heard about that, and I think all of us are aware that there are a number of companies who are interested in working with the city on that.
That's good.
All right, Commissioners, any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, City Manager. That was a great overview. And I know that it'll be available on our website for citizens to take a look at. The full recommended preliminary plan, so we'll make sure that we get that out to the community. So Commissioners, we have 2 action items related to the budget, and this is setting public hearings. The first one is a resolution setting a public hearing on establishing the property taxes and proposed fiscal year budget.
So moved.
Support. Great, thank you. And let me see, when is that date again? Is it May 14th?
May 14th, correct?
May 14th.
7 PM.
At our May 14th meeting. Go ahead.
Yep, so this is a public hearing, or a resolution to set a public hearing on May 14th at 7 PM on the proposed millage rate and budget. And you'll note that the millage rate requested is 8.9011, which is 0.0699 lower than last year. The average residential homeowner, due to increases in taxable value, will see about a $20 increase over their tax bill from last year. And again, this is just the city portion. So public hearing at 7 PM or thereabouts on the 14th.
Great, thanks. I think it's a good time to remind everyone that the vast majority of your property taxes do not come to the city. Right. I get asked that a lot, so I know not everyone sees their bill because they escrow it, and they think that the vast majority of it comes to this unit of government, and I remind them that it doesn't. But we are the collector, and then we distribute the funds out. So Commissioners, any other comments about setting that public hearing? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Next is a resolution scheduling a public hearing on Tuesday, May 14th to consider the fiscal year 2020 service provision fees.
Moved.
Support. All right. Jeff, anything to add to this?
Not really. Again, it's a public hearing on the proposed fees, same night as the budget proposed public hearing. You'll note in the schedule, we broke it out by the categories as we talked about in previous years. No recommended changes in the cost of living only, fees with larger than cost of living, and then fees achieving less than full cost recovery, and then also new fees. And there's various reasons why some fees may not gain full cost recovery. It might be limited by the state, or we might be lowering them to meet other objectives of the city. So, but if there's any specific questions, this is just setting that public hearing. We tried to reduce the schedules this year to make them more readable. We hid some columns, and we'll have schedules available for the public at that meeting as well.
Great. Thank you. Commissioners, any questions about that? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, next I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss pending litigation. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, and this is a voice vote, so Commissioner Hart?
Yes.
Commissioner Moody?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yes.
Commissioner Lanier? Yes. Commissioner O'Connor?
Yes.
And Commissioner Jones?
Yes.
And yes for me. So Commissioners, please go directly down to the law library for this executive session.
So what is my authority?